This is Horror Podcast.
Welcome to This is Horror, a podcast for readers, writers, and creators. I'm Michael David Wilson, and every episode alongside my co-host Bob Pastorella, we chat with the world's best writers about writing, life lessons, creativity, and much more. Today we are talking to Sofia Ajram, a metalsmith, novelist, and editor of queer and speculative stories. And one of those such stories is their debut novella, Coup de Grâce, which was nominated for a Bram Stoker Award in Lung Fiction and is currently up for a This is Horror Award in the novella category. Now, this is a two-part conversation, and this is the second part. But as with all of these episodes, you can listen in any order. And this one in particular, we do concentrate on Coup de Grâce. So with that said, a quick advert break, and then we'll get on with the show.
A brutal attack during a peaceful drive to the Irish countryside sets the stage for a grotesque tale of body horror, medical abuse, and occult conspiracy theory. Puppet's Banquet by Valkyrie LaCrue. Clay McLeod Chapman calls it a blissful injury upon the reader's psyche. Fans of Silent Hill, Hellraiser, and Cronenberg's The Brood will be consumed by its exquisite nightmares. Puppet's Banquet, out May 14th. Visit tenebraspress.com for more information.
It was as if the video had unzipped my skin, slunk inside my tapered flesh, and become one with me.
From the creator of This is Horror comes a new nightmare for the digital age, The Girl in the Video by Michael David Wilson. After a teacher receives a weirdly arousing video, his life descends into paranoia and obsession. More videos follow, each containing information no stranger could possibly know. But who's sending them, and what do they want? The answers may destroy everything and everyone he loves. The Girl in the Video is The Ring meets Fatal Attraction for the iPhone generation. Available now in paperback, ebook, and audio.
Okay, well here it is. It is Sofia Ajram on This is Horror. So let's talk about Coup de Grâce, and I want to know to begin with, what is the elevator pitch for this for our listeners who are unfamiliar?
Oh my. Coup de Grâce is about a man in Montreal who wants to take his own life, and he is taking the underground subway to the end of the line, where he plans to walk east until he hits the St. Lawrence River in Montreal and then drown. And he falls asleep on the subway, and when he wakes up, he's in a station that doesn't exist, and it has no exits, and he cannot go back. And so the book is about his experience being trapped in this liminal space that he cannot get out of, that has no windows, no exits. And yeah, any more than that would be spoiler territory.
And what was your why for writing this book?
It was a mix of things. It was a mix of circumstances. I was initially asked to write a novella for Crystal Lake Publishing. They have a series called Dark Tide. And earlier on the episode, we had talked about Jess Landry, who is the first person to read my work. And she had reached out to me. She said, hey, we're doing this anthology series, essentially. And her and Nadia Bulkin were looking for a third person to complete this anthology series. I loved both of their work. And so I said, of course, I'll, be part of this project. And so I had initially written this book as part of that. It started off with very different roots. where instead of being a singular story about this man who wants to take his own life, it was about a cast of people who were all dealing with liminalities in different ways. And so there was a subway car that appeared at the end of the line out of nowhere, and nobody knew where the tunnel went. And so they were sending an expedition team in. So it was a little bit more along the like traditional lines of almost like found footage. And I found that it was a lot to fit into a novella length project, because you have to tie the loose ends on all of these like cast of characters. And then B, when I ended up narrowing it down to this one character, long story short, I had the editor for the project look it over. The way that it was written didn't resonate with him personally, because I will be the first to admit, as the author of this work, that it is very verbose, and it is very dense in certain parts, and that is by design. I love when form sort of follows function. That was something that I was taught in graphic design, where something can be effective and beautiful, and it could also, you can step back and almost see like the meta framework of what it is that you're looking at. I love like when a film can only be a film, or you look at, House of Leaves is a perfect example. There is no audiobook of House of Leaves. It can only be in the form that it is. And long story short, the project didn't resonate with that editor. And I ended up writing a different project that felt more in line with that anthology series. Held on to the book, and then I can go into more specifics, but now it is published with Titan, and it's the beautiful way in which sometimes there are silver linings to things that you don't see at the time.
Right, and how did you end up working with Titan? So let's get into those specifics.
Okay, so I had this entire book that was written because it had to get all the way to the like editorial stage, and I started sending it out again back to my like Excel sheet nonsense. I had this Excel sheet that was like my top 5 publishers that I want to work with, and then I was very much reaching out to like independent publishers that like whose catalogs I really liked, who I wanted to work with. I was unagented, so it's almost one of those pipe dream things where it's like, unless you have an agent, there is no way to approach traditional publishing. One has to precede the other. There was this is the second time where I'm like bringing up Twitter as this like weird fortuitous thing, which is again why I'm sad that this like framework doesn't exist anymore in the same way. I think someone had tweeted like, describe your current work in progress as just like vibes. And then I think I had like described it as like these infinite escalators and these enormous underground cathedrals. And it was just like, because so much of liminal space relies heavily on space itself as like having a mind of its own and being a threat that's not natural or tangible, but as the existence of a space itself, I was like, oh, this is like the perfect tweet opportunity. And then the acquiring editor at Titan ended up seeing the tweet, and he sent me a message and he said, pitch this to me. And I had never pitched. I think maybe one other publisher had been like, pitch this to me, and then we'll see if I want like a full length manuscript. He liked the general pitch. I sent him the full manuscript. And then a couple months later, I ended up getting the response of like, we'd like to send this to acquisition. Is it still available? Which is just, like dream come true. So exciting as an author, especially for a work like this, which is like so deeply experimental for a publisher of that size to sort of take a risk on a project like that. Meant a lot to me, like specifically as an author or like as a creator. Very like affirming that sometimes you can do things that are a little bit outlandish and a little bit like outside of genre tropes. And if it's effective or it feels like it lands with the right audience, very much this has like a specific audience. People love it or they hate it, which is like having some distance between the release date, which was back in October and we're in March now. You know, I peek at Goodreads sometimes. It's interesting to see what people's reactions to it are. But it's really nice to have like an editor who absolutely stood behind the project and loved it for all of the like purpleness of its prose, which is like more than I could ever possibly ask for as a like creative trying to make a career.
Yeah, to me as well. I mean, I feel that a lot of the criticisms, because I had a little look at Goodreads too, seem to almost be features, or perhaps in a bizarre way might even be a compliment. You know, if people are saying, you know, at times it was really dense and it was kind of almost overwhelming, it's like, well, yeah, that's the metaphor for depression. You felt what you were kind of meant to feel through reading this book. You were really immersed in it. So, I mean, do you have a strange relationship with these so-called negative reviews? Because they're kind of complimenting your style at the same time, even if it wasn't their intention.
I think they're interesting. I always love like either with like literature or I guess more frequently since movies are so much easier to sort of take in. I love going on Letterboxd, sort reviews by like between half a star and 1 star and just see what people are writing, even about something that I love. I'm like, change my mind. Or something that I hate. I'm like, I want validation that I'm not the only one who thinks this. And so like, of course it's going to be for any media, including my own work. And yeah, it's interesting. The ones that sort of like make me smile are the ones that were like, this book does something at the end that made me feel like deeply uncomfortable. And like for that reason, I don't ever like, I hate this book. And it's like so interesting to see the like visceral reaction that people have where I'm like, as an artist, and this is something that I've had to learn over time. Like this is the first time that I publish something that's like read by more than, you know, a handful of like my close friends. So once something goes out into the world, it's like, it's no longer yours. You only can take responsibility for creating the thing that you had intended to create at the end of the day. And so I can see the ways in which having distance from its release date that I might have changed things now, which means that I've like grown as an artist, which is really nice. But overall, I'm like proud of it. And I think that for me, I would prefer to have created a work of art that has a strong reaction, even if it's not the reaction that I was hoping for, than people being like, it's all right, it's good, Sophia's nice. I'm like, okay, I don't want, like, I could talk about this ad nauseum. One of the things where I'm like, oh man, at the time of releasing it, it was my first book. I had like nothing to write on my author bio. So like the publisher was like, we need an author biography. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I was looking through all these like other books that I have, and the author bios are like, so-and-so has been nominated for like this such and such award and like has been a professor, blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, what? Like I have lived a whole life, but none of it feels relevant experience. And so I was like, okay, I gave lectures at like what used to be Miskatonic Institute in Montreal. They like renamed it Montreal. I was like, okay, put that in there. And then I was like, I'm the mod for the horror and horror lit subreddits. I love those forums. There's like so much interesting conversation that happens there. And so I put that in the author bio as well. And then there were so many like reviews that were popping up that were like low star rating. And they were like, oh, we can tell that Sophia is a horror moderator because it just has that air of like a creepypasta-ness to it. And I was like, okay, that like you can read that in a couple different ways, like slung as an insult, or like I think creepypastas can be good. But it was just interesting to see the ways in which people would take external things and like apply them to fiction. This is like the last thing that I'll say. There was one review that I had read, and it was like, this is clearly a projection of Sophia's life onto the character. And so this is a work, like an autobiographical work, and it should have been a series of essays. And I don't know, that was also so interesting to me to see. I don't know, to like read all these different experiences where I was like, that wasn't my intention. Of course, as an author, you're going to have some amount of self that you're putting into moments or characters. You're pulling from real life experiences, you're pulling from feelings, even if they're not exact experiences, you can approximate in your mind. And the whole point of an author is to imagine what it would feel like to be in those experiences. And like, I have gone through depression in my life. That was what drew me to the project in a lot of ways. But it was interesting to see people sort of projecting me onto these characters. So yeah, there's a nice variety of reviews out there, and it's always very interesting to read them, even the ones that are like, thumbs down, this is bad, I want to like wipe my ass with it. I'm like, okay, like thank you for your feedback.
Yeah, I hate it when people say what they think the story or the movie or the book or whatever should have been. It's like, well, no. that might be what you would have done with it, but this is the author's work. It was what it needed to be, what the author intended it to be. So the fact that you didn't like it or you didn't resonate with it is a separate conversation, but it is so arrogant to say this should have been a series of essays. And the most bizarre review I ever received in that genre of what a book should have been was when one was reviewing my novella, The Girl in the Video, and they basically were describing all the things they thought it should have had, and they were essentially The Ring. And it's like, well,
You're like, that exists.
I think they might have even written, why wasn't it more like The Ring? Well, because you can read The fucking Ring by Koji Suzuki. That's why, because as you say, it already exists. So it's bizarre. And of course, this is why we should never strive to please everyone, because you'll have some people, no matter what you do, some people will want it to be more original, in inverted commas, and then others will want it to be more like an archetype or an existing property, in my case, like The Ring. So you might as well do, going back to the first hour, what is authentically you and what you wanted to do, because God, it's a trap if you try to write something to universally please others, and it's impossible. You could never do that anyway, so you might as well not even attempt to.
Yeah, there's like the quote that I always think of. I think it was Dita Von Teese that said, you could be the tastiest peach in the world, but there's still people that aren't going to like peaches. And I'm like, yeah, at the end of the day, you have to think about, again, going back to like the existential question of, why am I doing this? Who am I doing this for? And there are some people where it's like, if your goal is to write commercial fiction and reach a lot of people and have a sort of wide audience in like a specific genre, then that should be their aim, and then they'll write work with that goal in mind. But for me, usually when I'm approaching work, I'm writing it for myself first and foremost, because if I'm not holding my own attention, there's no way that I'm going to be able to even finish the project. So it has to start with that. It has to start with nuggets of, what are these different things that interest me, and how can I combine them together in a way that's not regurgitating something that's already been done.
Yeah, and I think what we have here as well. It's a very original, it's at times very provocative, it is thought provoking, and it's also almost impossible to categorize. If somebody asked me, what is the book about, or what genre is it in? I mean, it's broadly in the horror genre. You can say that there's something a little bit Clive Barker at times about it, particularly just this hidden subway, these hidden spaces, and this liminality. Of course, I mentioned Silent Hill before. Of course, because of particularly compositionally, there's House of Leaves. I think there's also something a bit Jacob's Ladder about it. And it it is almost like, what is this book? It's like it's depression in literary form. I don't know kind of how else to even describe it. And I mean, when you were writing it as well, did you have concerns that it's like, yeah, in terms of the like even pitching it, but maybe that wasn't in your mind at the time because you'd originally had the Crystal Lake deal, and then kind of Daniel had approached you, but it it's a difficult one to kind of succinctly summarize. If someone asks you what's it about, it's like, well, just read the entire book and then you'll have your answer.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough one to categorize. And when I started writing it, I was working on a lot of different projects at the same time. I had a writing partner at the time where we would just like get together and shoot the shit at night and write little scenes for one another, which is really cool. It was like you're writing for an audience of one, and you already like each other's work, so it's always going to be a banger. And so the stakes were really low. And one of the things that I'm discovering now that I have a published work behind me is really keeping that core at the heart of everything that I do from here on forward, where I'm like, I can't and do not want to be reproducing that same work over and over again. And I have to stay true to whatever originally interested me about whatever projects I'm currently working on or will be working on, without thinking like, this is what's popular, or this is what worked about my last thing, and this is what people are going to expect. Once that sort of corrupts your mind, it's really hard to shed it. I don't know. So that's like something that's new to me.
I wonder too, and I think we alluded towards this, at the end of the book, it's maybe a compositional spoiler, but I don't think it's a plot spoiler to say that it literally at the very, very end turns into a choose your own adventure. I'll say
Mhm.
that about it. And the kind of thing about that is it then makes you as the reader complicit, which makes it more terrifying. Like you are now an active participant in this story. When did you know that this was going to be an element to the book? And how was this received by your editor, Daniel Carpenter?
I knew that it was going to be choose your own adventure before it was sent to Daniel, because it had already sort of had a complete draft at that point. But essentially, originally it was a more traditional narrative, although a little bit more philosophical, if you can like believe that. When it had the larger cast, because I was touching on the liminality of so many different elements of people's character background. So it was like one character was going through a gender transition, and one of them had just come back from war, and then one of them had like a sickness of the body, and one of them had a sickness of the mind. And so when you're touching on so many things, in order to tie all those threads together in a novella length, you have to almost paint with really broad strokes, which means the language was getting really philosophical to the point where like I myself was like, good God, like, is anyone going to want to read this? I'm like rereading my own stuff and I'm like thinking it's pretentious, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But at the time I was feeling almost like insecure about it. And then I went to go lie down and I just started thinking of like one of the characters who ended up being the main character of the story, Vicken, talking to me as the author. And then I opened up my notes and I just ended up writing a scene of like, what if he talked to me directly? And all of a sudden, this project that I was like, honestly, like 85% done, I was like, oh, I have this new excitement for it in a way that completely eclipses the feelings that I have had of it before. And I was like, okay, open up a new file. What if we change this completely? Just immediately started writing these like random, like quote unquote, choose your own adventure scenes where there's like a metafictional element where you're forced to interact with a character and the character in some way knows that you're there. I've always loved metafiction when it like shows up in films, when it shows up in books. I was like, oh my gosh, like, of course, this is like perfect. And then in that weird and wonderful way that art can sometimes be, it's like all of these puzzle pieces slotted together perfectly in a way that I hadn't necessarily anticipated. Where the like whole trajectory of the book all of a sudden made sense all the way back to like the start, where I was like, oh my God, there's all these like, we're talk technical, all these like planned and payoffs that made sense that I hadn't even necessarily thought of when I was initially writing it, which was really cool.
And you said during the kind of read through that there were, I suppose, moments of doubt as you were looking at some of the things that you'd written, and you said that you felt some moments were pretentious. Now that it's out in the world, and as we said before, I guess we've had about 6 months or so between it being published. Obviously, you've had a lot of really positive acclaim. You've had the award nomination. You've had really respected people within the genre say this is a fucking great book. Has this helped with your confidence and your identity as a writer to just boldly put out whatever it is that you want to put out? Because obviously it's resonating with, a not inconsiderable amount of people.
It definitely helps. It's like when you're writing something, of course, you're spending so much time alone with it. You've like created this entire world that you've been living in for months, sometimes years. And then all of a sudden it's out of your mind, it's out of your hands. You aren't really, I don't want to say responsible, but you don't really have control over how people are going to receive it. And to have other artists whose work I immensely respect have true, like honest, valuable feedback on it that's like positive is like more than I could ever possibly ask for. And of course it's like whatever, for every one nice thing that someone says, it feels like 10 bullets of like when one person says something negative. But the more amount of time that passes, the more I think like I accomplished what I set out to write. And that's at the end of the day more than I could ever possibly ask for. Like if I had never published this and I had just written it and it sat in a drawer, I would still be proud of it. Which at the end of the day is how I want to continue to approach future work. Nothing is ever sort of guaranteed, especially in this industry. Things move at like such a quick pace. You don't know like if people's taste is going to resonate with what it is that you're writing. Sometimes one story is a banger and another one is like an absolute flop. So you can only ever really make things for yourself Otherwise, you won't necessarily feel fulfilled ever.
Yeah, this is why I often say if you can find joy or you can find fulfillment in the act of writing itself, then you win every time. So I think it's important to try and find joy as much as we can in what is, a solitary and often isolating experience.
Mhm. I definitely think so. And that can look like a lot of things to different people. When we were talking about like pretensions earlier, I was thinking about Ethan Hawke did like an interview, I think, with Time magazine, where he was talking about pretentiousness and it just meaning that as an artist, you have to set a goal for yourself. And so might as well have those goals be lofty. And you can approach that from the perspective of pretension or from the perspective of like experimentalism or anything that's like out of the norm for a genre or for an industry. Um, and I think of that often when I'm like approaching the things that I'm currently working on, where I might as well push the envelope of whatever it is that I'm trying to do. You can always reel it back. But I find that it's hard to sort of push things further when you've already established them.
Now, there are a number of references to other things, kind of little Easter eggs hidden within the text. And one that particularly stood out is the Japanese filmmaker Kurosawa, specifically to his film Pulse.
Mhm.
So I want to know a little bit about your decision to include that within Coup de Grâce, and also I want to know about your relationship with East Asian cinema and East Asian studies, because we spoke a little bit about that offline. So let's bring it online and let the people know.
Yeah. I have like a deep love of that film. And I don't know, I'm a personal believer in if something resonates with you, to sort of pepper it in wherever you want. So it felt like the scene that references that, which is like the elevator game scene, where the character is thinking back on the scene from Pulse, where um, on the computer screens, once you load a website, it says, "Would you like to meet a ghost?" Um, and so that element felt so striking, and I was like, I'm going to put it in because I can. So it's, I guess, like an interesting background for it. But when I was a teen, and I was initially getting into horror, as a lot of people do, once you start to get into the genre, you start to push the envelope with yourself almost to see what is the spookiest thing that I could find? What is the most like intense, harrowing, disturbing, disgusting film that I could find? And of course, there's like the top 10 lists that always pop up. And J horror and like specific, like in particular, was on so many of these lists of like deeply dreadful fear that almost is like difficult and like nebulous to identify. And so I was going on like torrenting websites and downloading all of these movies. And so I feel as though they had a really deep influence on my aesthetic as an artist. Um, One of the things that I've like sort of learned recently is there's so much of what happens to you in your childhood and in your early teens that sort of locks in your aesthetic or your voice as a creator. And it's not to say that like as an adult that you can't add to that lexicon. But there's always references that your creative mind will go back to. And so like Japanese horror is certainly one of them. And then like completely unrelated to that, after I had graduated from graphic design, which is like college here, I applied to be in cinema school with no film in my portfolio. I only applied with graphic design, and so I got rejected. And I was like, it's fine. I'll get a BA in something else. And then when I looked at the McGill book of like curriculum, I was like, oh my God, they don't do like sort of fine art at McGill. I wasn't sure what to study. And I felt compelled to do like to complete academics or at least like complete a BA. And so I was like, okay, East Asian studies. The person I was dating at the time had lived in Japan. I was like, I love Japanese literature. I love Japanese culture. And I wanted to learn more about like Korean history and Chinese history. And so I ended up studying that. And then, as with a lot of things in youth, it feels as though once you start something, that it's like a sunken cost theory where you're like, I've already put a year into this, I have to continue. And so I ended up getting a bachelor's in East Asian studies with like a major in Japanese language and culture. How much Japanese can I speak now? So little, because I'm not immersed in it. So I'm so ashamed. But it comes back when I visit, thankfully.
So how much Japanese could you speak kind of, I guess, at the height of of the studies? Because I suppose having not done a degree in it, I don't know what level did they take it to?
Yeah, so there was you could major in different elements. So there was like the historical element, the culture element, and then the language element. And you have to pick two sort of branches of it. And so I did the language and the culture element. And it was the first time in my life where I needed a tutor because language does not come easily to me at all, which is funny because like my mother's a translator. She can speak so many languages. It comes to her so easily. She has the memory for it. And me, it's just like brain fog. But at the height of it, essentially like by the end of the 4 years, you are supposed to be able to be a translator. And then I only did a year of the like language module itself, which is like the basic to graduate. But I was like dreaming in Japanese, which was interesting. Like I remember right before the final exam, which is like you have to write this 10-page essay and you don't know what the subject is going to be until you get there. I was like, I had this dream about like being on Oprah and we were speaking in Japanese together. And I was like, oh, this is like the height of a language really permeating my mind.
Yeah, I've had it said before that once you start dreaming in the target language that you're learning, that's when you know that you've kind of leveled up. So, I mean,
Mhm.
Oprah as well. I don't know. Do we want to
So
unpack
weird.
that? Is there anything to unpack? What a what a facet to the dream to include Oprah
So
talking in.
random.
Yeah. Yeah, but goodness, I mean, that's an intense course in the 4 years for you to be expected to be at a level where you can be a translator. But that's a facet of the course. You're also learning about the culture. Goodness
Yeah,
me.
it was intense. I ended up going more with like the sort of culture branch and then double majoring in women's studies because like gender studies and social justice studies was interesting to me as well at the time. But the culture module sort of opened my eyes up to so much Japanese literature that I never would have necessarily known about. Because beyond like Murakami at the time, there was like not that many authors that were permeating, I guess, like bookstores in the West. There's like others that I could think of. But there were courses that I was taking that were like anarchy in Japan, where we were reading books on like history and culture that had to do with that, which is really interesting to me. And I'm glad that I have these books like on my shelf now that I can still go back and reference that I might not necessarily have known about otherwise.
And so when you're watching Japanese cinema, do you typically have the English subtitles on, or I don't know at what level your Japanese has got, or what it was at the peak?
Yeah, I definitely need to have subtitles on now. It's um my mind is so slow to register the like translation in real time, and then like the way that sentences are ordered, like this, is not like the same as in English. It's like you're like waiting for the end of the sentence to be able to like translate it, and then by the time that that's done, it's like moving so quickly. I'm just, I don't know. As a writer, I'm embarrassed to say I'm not like like language does not necessarily come very easily to me. When I started off the first year of the program, I was literally like recording myself saying vocabulary and then trying to replay it to myself at night for like hypnosis, which is like, that's not a thing that works, by the way. If anyone wants to try that, you're not going to retain any of that shit. But I was like trying to easy out my way through it, which I very quickly learned was not going to work. But yeah, living in Montreal, I'm like, I have to know French. It's like the official language in Quebec. But that comes a lot more easily because I was like, I grew up in Quebec mostly. So your brain is spongy when you're a child. And so you learn language so much more easily. And then Japanese as an adult, I was like, oh, okay, like without being fully immersed, it's so difficult to practice. But yeah, maybe I should watch the films without subtitles. I should read more. See, but what I ended up doing when I was like in my first year was just reading children's books because I was like, oh, okay, it has like the hiragana written on top. I was like, okay, this is accessible to me.
Yeah, but I mean, unfortunately, that's what we have to do when we're starting out. You want to just jump in with the literature, but you're just not going to understand any of it. I mean, if it was the other way around and you're encountering English for the first time, obviously there's a lot of metaphor, and the literal reading is not often the actual meaning of the text. So, yeah. But that hiragana and katakana really helps. It's like sometimes I wish that the kanji just didn't exist because reading would
There's a
be
lot of
such a
them.
breeze. But yeah, like 2,000 basic ones, but then about 10,000 in total in general.
Yeah,
And
it was at the end of the like first year, they were like, you have to have learned 4,000. I was like, so I have this stack of flashcards that I keep just as like a memento that I'm like, you did this. You were capable of that. You're capable of a lot. I'm like, one day I will go back and try to relearn them, but I don't know.
yeah,
It's a lot.
4,000 in 1 year. That is intense. That is ridiculous. And the difficulty as well is that there are quite a lot that look so similar, and it's like, nope, there's one stroke different, and now it means
Yeah.
something completely different.
Yeah, exactly. So it was interesting. I'm like, I'm glad I did it and I learned a lot. And it like taught me a certain discipline that I didn't know that I had in me. Because to do something that you're like not naturally good at, we like talked about this a little bit earlier in the episode where I like had started jewelry. It's so hard to be like an adult beginning something. Where you're like, oh, I don't want to waste time. I just want to like get to the good part where you have to sort of do your due diligence and pay your dues and do the learning process. But yeah.
And going back to Coup de Grâce, do you think that, in writing it, what was it? Cathartic? Was it transformative? Did it even help you navigate the landscape of depression? Because there's so much that has been packed into it. I'm wondering how just the experience of writing changed you or affected you.
That's an interesting question. I have definitely gone through, like, come in and out of depressive episodes throughout my life. And I think that one thing that comes from age and experience is having gone through experiences personally, you can look back on your life and be like, I made it through this. I can do it one more time. And so it was interesting putting that to literal experimentation, where it's like, if I put a character in a liminal state that feels like it's eternal, how much can I like push that character before it feels like it's too much and it like tips the scale where they're like, I don't want to do this anymore. Or like, oh, this is fine. I got through this the last time. You really have to sort of toe the line. And I think it was only through going through that experience multiple times in my life where I was able to be like, okay, I'm going to try and be level-headed and patient about this and try to give that same level-headedness and patience to my character. And then it's at the reader's discretion if they want to push the envelope or not. And I think it says a lot about whoever it is that's reading it, what they ultimately choose in the choose your own adventure element, which is always really interesting. Whenever someone tells me that they've read the book, the first question that I always ask is like, what did you do at the end? Which says a lot about them, I think.
Yeah, I must admit that, you know, for the sake of having this conversation, I then went back to look at, right, what are all the possible options, you
Hell
know,
yeah.
to make sure that I'd read it thoroughly, which perhaps is not in the spirit, but it felt like it gave a more complete reading experience. And yeah, the fate can be pretty different depending upon the option that you choose, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's some people that, and it's like more common than I thought, would read through it completely straightforward. So it's like, for a choose your own adventure, it has page flip elements, which was when when I had submitted that to Titan, it was really interesting because I was like, oh shit, I have this like Word document that if you load it on a different computer than mine, page 89 is now page 91, and the page flip instructions no longer make sense. So I had to learn how to like hyperlink within the document. But there were some people that were just reading it straight through. They were like ignoring the page turn elements. And I was like, okay, that says something about them too, which is interesting. And then I have to make sure that this still makes logical sense if people completely ignore the instructions, which is, I don't know, fascinating to me. There's like another book I'm thinking of, In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado, who's like a fantastic author, where she looks at an abusive relationship through the lens of a haunted house and all these different writing tropes. And so one of the writing tropes is a choose your own adventure. And the way that she had done it, there's like one point where I did like you, where I was like, I'm going to read the full experience. You get to a page and it's like, you couldn't have gotten to this page unless you flipped through and cheated. So that says something about you as a reader. And it's like talking to you directly. And I was like, oh my God, this is like, it's rare to experience, again, like a metafictional element where it's sort of breaking the fourth wall, and saying, once a work of art is completed, there is a like correct end to where things are going, whether or not you will that into existence, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, it feels like you were almost being called out. It's like, right, we know that you've been cheating, so
Yeah,
gonna have a little word with you now.
exactly.
How did Titan respond to the choose your own adventure element? Were they receptive from the start? Was there any concern? Was there a logistical headache as to how it might work for other formats of the book?
It's been, I'm like really happy to say it's been really good thus far. I did have like a meeting with Daniel, my editor, where I basically had to, I guess, like defend the order in which the Choose Your Own Adventure elements happen. Because again, if someone reads it straight through, it has to make certain sense. And he had suggested some changes where I was like, no, I want to keep it the way that it is for this reason. And then he agreed. And so I'm really lucky in that we aligned really like easily from the get-go on that. I just found out recently that there's going to be an audiobook version that's coming out in August, which I'm so excited about. I'm like, oh my God, somebody's going to be reading my work for like a full 2 hours, 3 hours. I don't know. I have no idea how they're going to do that. Are they going to be like, click chapter 11 if like Felix does this? I don't know. I don't know how that works. I've never audiobook read a Choose Your Own Adventure story. I don't know how they know what to do.
Yeah, I was thinking about this before, and I noted that there wasn't an audiobook. I assumed it was because of the ending and the impracticalities. And then, as I often do, my brain starts to run away with like, well, what would it look like if it was a Choose Your Own Adventure? And I was thinking, I don't even know if you can do this, but would you have to program something in so that when it got to the choose part, it pauses the audiobook? So you
That'd be great.
have to actively press a button. Because, if not, then I imagine so many people would probably, particularly because sometimes you'll be listening to audiobooks when we're
Yeah,
on
just
the
like,
go. They're like, oh, well, let's just let it play. But if the audiobook pauses, then it forces you have to click this option or that option. I don't know if that is practical. I don't know if it's possible, because obviously,
yeah.
you're not just on one platform. You're going to be on Audible, you're going to be on audiobooks.com, you're going to be on Google Play Books. I
Mm-hmm.
don't need to list everything else, so this is going to turn into a weird conversation. And the normal way that you would upload an audiobook would be you just upload each individual chapter file. So
Mm-hmm.
you
The way
need
that
to ask. You need to find out how they're going to do that.
I really should. Like the way that you mentioned it makes me think of when Netflix released Bandersnatch as part of like the Black Mirror series. And then I think how they did it was it sort of pauses. And then if you don't select, it randomly chooses a response for you. And I'm like, that would work. But of course, Netflix is in charge of its own UI. Um, I don't know how like Apple or Google is gonna approach this. So literally the only way that I can think of is like click chapter 12 if like the character does this. Um Otherwise, I don't know. It's gonna be as like new for me as it is to readers.
Yeah, they're probably going to have to go for the click chapter blah, blah, blah option.
Mhm.
Because without that, they potentially have to create an entire new platform and interface. And I love your
Um,
book, but I'm not sure if corporations like Google and
it's an
Amazon are
investment.
prepared to do that. But if you're going to say, like, okay, click chapter 22 for this, chapter
Mhm.
10 for this, or whatever, they also need to bake in some sort of, I don't know, 10 to 20-second pause at the end.
Pause.
I wash up a lot when I'm listening to a book, so I need
Same.
time, and I wear washing up gloves because I don't want these hands to get all hard and rough. So you got to give me time to take the gloves off to click to the next chapter. So
I will
that's what
report your
I'm
notes.
saying
Hack to
to
type.
Audible. Just give me 10 seconds. 'Cause those gloves can be on tight.
Hmm.
Yeah. Which maybe segues into your previous job as a dominatrix. I didn't even mean to go there, but
Like, hey.
as I said, tight gloves. It's like there's a segue opportunity. I am a little bit interested in how you got into that line of work and how long you were a dominatrix for. Part-time dominatrix, you said, so not full time. A little bit
Like,
on the side.
Yeah, it's because I was also working at Sephora at the time, which made for really interesting bag checks. Like when you clock in and clock out at your shift, your bag has to get checked. And so sometimes I'd have some interesting um, items in there for my managers to discover. But basically, if I like draw it back to a precise moment, there was a sex blogger that I used to follow. I think her name was Carly Scorciano, and she had a series on Vice that she was doing just about exploring sexuality around the world. And in one of her episodes, she met with a New York City dominatrix, and she was like, "This is wild and hysterical and delightful. You can get paid to like corporally punish someone or humiliate someone or whatever." And I was like, oh my god, that's fascinating. And so as someone who is like a through purist at endeavors, sometimes I reached out to different doms in the city. One in particular, I was like, I liked her website in terms of she approached it from a really almost therapeutic angle, where it was about meeting like client specific needs, and it's not necessarily about you. It's about crystallizing a. It's not always like a role play, but like a fantasy. And I was like, "Can I tutor under you, essentially?" And she agreed. And then I met with her. She let me like spectate a session, and it was really cute. I still have it. She had this like little book that she had given me, and then she was like, "Here are all the essentials of like pro doming," and each page had like a different element. It was like ball busting, like cock and ball torture, humiliation. It was like all these different elements, and so she was like writing little notes for me. And so I did like duo sessions with her. She was like, anything that you're doing on something else, I want you to know what it feels like on you first. And so I got like tased with a cattle prod to make sure that if I like ever did that to someone, I would know exactly what it felt like. And then I ended up doing that for like 4 or 5 years. It was like on and off. I loved it as an experience. It was really fun. It was really delightful. It was cool to get almost like a prompt at the start of every session where it was like, sometimes people had like, more common like fetishes, we'll say. And then sometimes they were more niche and specific. And I'd have really interesting conversations with people that I otherwise wouldn't have talked to or wouldn't have had those conversations with, where like the person that I like that mentored me, because it is such a therapeutic experience for a lot of people, there's like an openness that happens right away because you have to establish trust in such a quick amount of time, that I made some really close relationships from those experiences.
How do you think that being a dominatrix expanded your life?
Ooh. I think that it gave me more perspectives on different people's, like, not necessarily, judging a book by its cover, so to speak. Where I was like, okay, at the time, I'm like, I'm a young woman. I'm meeting with a lot of older men. Some of them are like in the corporate industries or like government industries. And it's like, we on paper have nothing in common. But then once you get to know someone on such a like intimate level, you either do have a lot in common or you can find really interesting elements of each other. And so it taught me in a lot of ways to be open to people completely, no matter what. And not to the point where you allow yourself to get walked all over or allow for like inappropriate things to happen, but more in the sense of like people come from all walks of life. There's always like some interesting part of someone that you'll relate to, even if it doesn't seem like it at first glance. And so it gave me a lot more patience, especially as someone who was like in my early 20s at the time. Like everything feels so fast paced when you're at that age. It taught me to sort of slow down and have more meaningful relationships with people that I wouldn't have necessarily geared myself towards.
And I wonder, what do you think are some of the misconceptions about the industry, and what do you wish more people knew?
That's a good question. I remember a couple years ago, Netflix came out with this like mini series. I think it was called like Bonded or something like that. And it was this like quirky mini series about a girl that worked in like a dungeon. And so it's a little bit different than what I was doing because I was like freelance. So I would essentially like rent a dungeon anytime that I had a session. But there are some folks that will work in dungeons. So they like go there and they almost have like a 9 to 5 where a client will come in, they'll fill out a survey. These are the things that I want to do. It either corresponds with what you offer or not. And then if it does, you get paired up. And so it was like her quirky experiences working in a dungeon. And so much of it felt like a parody of the industry where a lot of the fetishes were like played for like cheap thrills, where it was like, this person's into like puppy play, for instance. Like, isn't that so wild and weird? And I think that there is like a lighthearted humor that a lot of clients and like DOMs even will approach the work with, where there's like delightful aspects of it. I'm thinking in specific, there was a podcast that I used to listen to called Sex Nerd Sandra, and she would talk about all these different aspects of sexuality. And she had one episode where she brought a DOM on, and the DOM was talking about what was her like weirdest session ever. And there was a client who wanted her to take, what was it called? Baby powder, and like tie him up and then like threaten to baby powder his entire body. And he was like, no, no, please, like very, very dramatically. And so there is something like wildly delightful about that in its like strangeness. And so I wish that show, and I wish that a lot of people more generally approached that sort of thing with like more levity and open-mindedness and understanding, rather than like pigeonholing people that like do sex work or go to sex workers for specific things. Because like the like variety of like clients and requests and interests and people's backgrounds, like you would not believe. It is just so varied. And so I think that it tends to get diluted down into like really specific boxes, like anything. But yeah, that's what first sort of comes to mind.
Yeah, a little bit of what we're talking about here reminds me of when Raf James White said, never yuck someone's yum. Don't kink shame. There's a broad variety of things that people are into. And yeah, I suppose in any kind of niche industry, there's the temptation for outsiders to almost parody it, or to, in their mind, it becomes an archetype or a stereotype. But obviously, it's much broader than that.
Yeah, there's a film festival in Montreal that happens every year called Fantasia Film Festival, and it's like a genre festival. And there's a lot of really great indie films that will get picked up by larger distributors at this festival. And one of them that I had seen a couple of years ago was called Cam, and it was, I think it was picked up by Netflix.
Really good film.
Phenomenal film. It's about a woman who's a cam girl, and then all of a sudden one day she wakes up, she can't log into her account. There's already someone who is her exact doppelganger who's streaming on her account and doing things that progressively she would not necessarily do. And so it's like about her experience trying to reconcile this. And the writer-director Issa Mazet had been there because it was like, I think, the international launch. And she had created this film from her own personal experiences as working as a cam girl. And I loved that perspective. It felt really authentic. And so I had reached out to her after the movie, and then we had become sort of like vaguely online friends. And the weird roundabout way in which the world is wonderful, she ended up reading Coup de Grâce and blurbing it, which was really nice. But yeah, the world is wild and wonderful in some ways.
The film absolutely is on Netflix, because that's where I first watched it, and goodness, it's a wonderful film. I need to rewatch it because it has been a few years now, and I'd love to talk to her on the show at some point, because it got a moment, but you know, where a lot of people were talking about it, but it seemed to be very fleeting. So we need to bring it back. We need to get that in the collective consciousness, because I mean, you talk about authenticity and putting something out where it's truly the vision of the creator and could have only really been written or created by that person.
Mm-hmm.
It's Cam.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's also like some of the work that I find most resonates with me is like work that could only have ever been created by that specific person at that specific moment in their life. There's some weird serendipitous crystallization that happens where it's like you're almost channeling something external, where, you know, at least like for myself, like people go back and ask me like, how did you make this thing? Or, you know, the same question will be asked to other people. And it's almost like I did it because I had to at the time. Like this, you had to exercise something from your body.
Yeah, this is how I feel every time I read something by Cassandra Core or Eric LaRocca.
Yes.
They both feel like they could only have been written by those two amazing and talented individuals at that particular moment in their life. And that's why they're an instant read for me in both instances.
Mm-hmm. Hellbore is very good. That is Cassandra's next book.
Yeah.
The Library at Hellbore. Fantastic. I love a battle royale. It's one of my guilty pleasure as like a sort of subgenre.
Well, there should be no guilt involved in any any battle royale enjoyment. On the page, maybe there should be a little bit of guilt if it's literally in person, or quite a lot of guilt. But we don't need to talk about that on the podcast. We don't need lawsuits or criminal investigations. So
it's another phenomenal Japanese film.
it is. It absolutely is. Let's
Big
move
influence.
on. Yeah. Let's move on to what are you working on at the moment?
I have my hands in so many different pies right now. I don't know if that's because of like it's so easy to externalize it as like the state of the world. There's like so many things going on that I find it hard to narrow my focus. But I think one of the other things, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but one of the next things that I want to work on, or that I am working on, is like debut novel stuff. And there is so much pressure that goes into the title of a debut novel, because it feels very make or break, at least in like traditional publishing, or my understanding of traditional publishing. And so I'm working on a bunch of different things. There's like a novella that I'm working on right now that feels like it has some similar roots to Coup de Grâce. It's set in the early aughts, and it is about someone who meets someone in an online chat room, and as their relationship deepens, they sort of form a codependent relationship with each other. And as that relationship blossoms, the main character's world literally starts to close in, where it's like his reach to the outside world is limited to his block and then his building and then his floor and then his apartment and then his body. And then it's like, what happens when you're robbed of everything because you're so focused on a relationship that you don't realize is toxic at the time. So that's like one of the things that I'm working on. And then I have a zombie novel that I'm working on. And then I have a non-genre book that is set on Titanic that I'm working on. I have a deep hyperfixation with Titanic and everything that is sort of like the early 1900s, the early 1910s. But that one requires a lot of research. So I'm trying to take my time with it.
Well, the Titanic one in particular might be particularly anxiety inducing for you because I understand that you have a fear of objects underwater.
I do. You've done your research. I have what's called submechanophobia, which is like specifically man-made machinery underwater. I don't know why. My brother also has this phobia. I'm like, did we experience a mutual trauma when we were children? Weirdly enough, it's not like old rusted things. So like that's fine for me. But seeing like a fresh turbine underneath the water sets off my fight or flight for some reason. So I don't know. I have to like examine that one more.
I mean, if you did see, in your own words, a fresh turbine underwater, what do you think your reaction would be? And with the fight or flight, I mean, would you get out of there? Would you freeze up? What would go on?
I get like a weird flighty sort of panic, which is when I was 12 and 13, I had it in my mind that I wanted to do synchronized swimming. I don't know why. My mother indulged me. And so there's these like massive Olympic swimming pools that you're like practicing in that are so deep because you're doing so many different like acrobatic tricks underwater. And the like warm up every day is like they throw the rings down to the bottom of like the deepest part of the pool and you have to like hold your breath to go and pick them up and doing laps and all these things. And the panic that I would get getting near a drain. I'm thinking of like Chuck Palahniuk's
As
like
soon,
haunted
as soon
story.
as soon as you said that, I was thinking of
just like
guts and like, oh god, this is the
collective.
ultimate horror story for you.
We have like collective trauma over guts. Just everyone who's ever read that short story. But yeah, just absolutely traumatic. And I don't freeze up. I get really like flighty about it, where I'm like, I gotta swim out of here as like quickly as possible. There's not like many other things in my life where I feel that sort of animal baseline primal panic. I don't know. And it like a lot of the time it doesn't make sense. It's like a pool cleaner. I'm like, it's not gonna do anything ominous, but it's a weird distortion that happens underwater. I don't know. I was a child, easily influenced.
Maybe something will come to the forefront of your mind one day and you'll realize this was the moment, this was the incident that set it all off. But, yeah. I mean, some people, when they have a fear, they would go for immersion therapy to try and overcome it. But I mean, your fear is so specific. It's like, how many situations are you going to be in where that's going to come up anyway?
Oh my God, Michael, you have no idea. There was like one time during the pandemic where because of lockdown, I had to furlough my jewelry production team. And so I was like producing all of this jewelry myself, which was just like a nightmare amount of work because when everyone is under lockdown and cannot spend their money on traveling and weddings, they online shop, which was great for the business, but just like I was so much jewelry production. And then I had this one day where I was doing so much jewelry and it's like 8:00 at night. I'm done like a 12-hour shift. I'm rinsing off the last pieces. And then one of the pieces fell into the drain. And so I had to like shut off the tap and it got stuck in the sort of like U-pipe that's underneath the sink. And it took me like an hour and a half to like muster up the courage to open up the pipe to get this gold pendant out because I was just like, I can't get near the pipes. They like scared me so much. And I knew that that was irrational, but I just had to like hype myself up for so long. I was exhausted by the end of that day, but I don't know. That's immersion therapy for you.
That is a very unfortunate situation, let's say, to find yourself in. You said that your brother also has this fear. I hope that your partner doesn't as well, because then at least if your partner doesn't have the fear, then should something happen, they can
Yeah, he can
intervene.
go and
If they do have the fear, then rather than it being genetic, it then almost becomes this terrifying, is it a virus? Anyone you get too close to, they kind of contracted it. We've gone a little bit It Follows with that idea.
yeah. What's that? Oh my god, it's literally like blanking out of my memory, but it's like the Canadian zombie film where it's like words, it's infection happens through
Oh,
words.
I, yeah, it's gone for me too,
Pontypool.
but I know what.
Pontypool.
Yes, yeah, Pontypool.
But yeah.
Another very good and underrated film.
hmm Canada, represent.
There you go. Well, I asked you what you were working on at the moment, and you mentioned, the novel being the next big milestone. But it sounds like from your answer there are multiple novels, so it that'll be the next thing. It's like, well, which one is the debut novel? And in terms of that conversation, in terms of putting a debut out into the world, do you have an agent? Is that mostly a conversation with the agent? Are you representing yourself? Do you go to Titan because you've got that pre-existing really good relationship and they're a phenomenal publisher? Or do you kind of send multiple novels to multiple people and see what the universe delivers back?
Mhm. Titan definitely gets like first dibs, and I'm talking with some folks for representation. But I want to have like a completed thing ready to present. Because you got to go off the momentum, you know.
So you've got the Titanic novel. Is it a novel or is that one a novella?
That one's a novel. I had.
Okay.
It's like such a bizarre sort of like side through line, but I had like a writing partner a couple years ago, and we were just writing stories for each other. And then at one point we were like, let's write entire books for each other. And I had started this project, and I was like, I'm going to write this book, and I'm going to create this entire box of like things that would have been found on the Titanic that have to do with this book. And it was really cool. I like posted a video about it on TikTok, and it went viral. And then I was like, oh, I guess I have to finish this book. There's like 30,000 words of it that are done. I just need to like complete it. But because it was written like for specifically one other person, it doesn't necessarily make sense narrative, like structure wise, because it's like connected universes to the stories we're writing for each other. So I'm like, okay, it has to stand alone on its own 2 feet, as like, I don't want to create an unintentional series. There can be Easter eggs. I think that that's fun. But that's why it's taking a little bit longer.
So you've also got the zombie novel. I suspect, just based on your work, that it's probably not a conventional zombie novel, or there's going to be a twist. There's going to be some layering. I wonder, is there anything you can tell us about that one, or are you kind of keeping it under wraps? And then linked to that, I'm wondering logistically, seeing as you have multiple projects on the go, is there one project that you're actively writing now, and then when that's complete, you'll move on to the next? Or is it literally as wild as like, right, Monday is Zombie Day, Tuesday is Titanic, Wednesday, guess I haven't done any metalsmithing for a while? What is it looking like?
Sometimes it is that, but I try not to have that be my routine, because there's like, you need to get into a certain voice, especially if it's like more historical work, like Titanic. There's a certain vocabulary that I have to be using that all of a sudden, if I'm writing something more contemporary, like the chat room story that takes place in the early aughts, like I can't be using that sort of slang in the Titanic novel. So usually when I'm like working on one thing, I try to really buckle down and work on that one thing. The reason why I'm like playing a little bit more is because I'm more in the like outlining stage of a lot of these. So I sort of follow the muse, so to speak. I am mostly working on the Titanic one right now. The zombie one is earlier we were talking about first works. That's the book that I had fully written and then put on the back burner because I was like, I need to revisit this when I have more skill as an author. And so that was finished in 2020. And now I have like 5 years worth of life experience and author experience to sort of go off of. And it's also been like 5 years worth of writing notes in my phone where I'm like, oh my gosh, like this character makes sense now. These things are related to each other. And so what I need to do is have a bunch of sticky notes and like have a crazy wall full of like thread connections with each other so that I can figure out what to throw away from that novel and what can stay. But it's an interesting process.
Yeah, I'm so fascinated by all of these, and yeah, the chat room one as well. I mean, immediately that does make me think a little bit about Eric LaRocca. I feel like he's the chat room, or
Hell yeah.
like kind of any sort of communication medium master. He's the master, he's the mistress, he's the fucking god of it all. And yeah, I'm so into that kind of thing as well. There's almost something a little bit epistolary about it. It's
Mm-hmm.
experimental storytelling. So I'm very much looking forward to that one too.
Yeah, I loved Things Have Gotten Worse. And then
Oh yeah.
more recently, I read Wrecked, which was like also in sort of forum storytelling.
You read Wretch?
Wrecked. I'm
Wrecked.
wrecked. Let me.
Is Wrecked by Eric?
No, it is by Alex Gonzalez.
Okay, it's because Eric has a forthcoming story called Wretch. So then, because it was so similar, the word I don't wait. Because that was a surprise too. Because I thought, what I didn't think he'd even finished writing it yet. You read it before he finished? What's going on? Liminal spaces becoming reality. You're reading works that haven't been finished.
I wish. Yes, Wretch, the like Cassandra story, also interests me, even though it's not written yet. But sorry, the author name sort of like escaped me. Wrecked, Rekt, which is like told in sort of forum format, which I think is really interesting. I think that's coming out later this year, but I love to see how people approach epistolary storytelling in different ways, especially since the internet has so much history now that we can pull off of, where it feels very distinct of certain eras. Like I'm thinking back on the novella that I ended up writing for Crystal Lake. There's like some of that story has to do with Twitter. And I'm like, oh, it's not even Twitter anymore now. So that really dates it to a specific time in history.
Yeah, my forthcoming novel has a reference to Twitter, and I wondered about changing it back, but I don't know. This is a story set in 2023, basically, and as specific as that is, it's like I'm just keeping it. And there's some people that hope that eventually then the social network now known as X will change hands again. So, basically it will become Twitter again. So just hold on to that thought. But I don't
Everybody's
know.
author bios with the links at the back. That's like, find us on Twitter. It'll be like relevant
But
again.
yeah, it's interesting that I decided to keep the reference to Twitter within the story, but in the author bio, yeah, I've
You're like,
said where you can find me on
blue sky.
X. But yeah, I don't know. I feel that probably whatever the dominant social media form is going to be, it probably doesn't even exist yet. Like I think, all these things like Blue Sky and Threads, they're just kind of Twitter clones. So
Mhm.
whatever it is that really taps in, I think it will be different to whatever we have seen, something we can't really conceive of, or like you kind of said at the start, it's going to become so fragmented that there never will be a
Mhm.
predominant one anymore. It'll
Mhm.
revert more back to the kind of old internet days where we have our little niches and our little forums, and maybe it's not such a bad thing, particularly if it then means you don't have the equivalent of everyone's having fun at the party and then some asshole walks
FOMO.
in and they're like, fuck
Dude,
you, I hate everything you stand for, why do you exist?
look, I don't even know you.
Yeah, it's like, what are you doing here? Get out. Jesus Christ.
Someone kick this guy.
Yeah. Well, thank you for spending the vast majority of your evening chatting to me. This has been a hell of a lot of fun and really informative. So I do appreciate you taking all this time.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so glad we finally got to talk. I'm like, honestly, as someone who's been a fan for like 5 years, I'm like, I feel so delighted that we finally got to talk. So thank you.
Yeah, and you have please got to keep me informed as to what's coming out next, because I would love to chat with you. I know that Bob would love to chat with you too. He's very upset to be missing this one, but he's presently at Ghoulish, so I'm sure that he's having fun in some capacity, maybe on the
It's a worthy
yeah,
reason to miss. I wish I
yeah.
was a ghoulish as well.
I wish I was at Ghoulish.
Oh yeah.
Maybe people listening also wish they were at Ghoulish.
Yes. All in spirit.
But where can people connect with you
Uh
in
I
this
will just say,
fragmented world?
yes, in this liminal world between Twitter and whatever is coming next, I can be found at Sofia Ajram on whatever platform you're probably on. That's the trick. You just keep the same handle.
It's a good trick.
Mm.
Well, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
Oh my gosh. That's it, really. Keep on trucking. It's a hard world out there. Make the art that you want to make. Do the shit that you want to do. We don't know how long we're going to be here for. do the things that bring you joy, like we said earlier. If it doesn't bring you joy, maybe it'll bring you life lessons or a dollar. I don't know. We're getting too existential. It's getting late in the evening for me.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to This Is Horror Podcast. If you enjoy the show and want to support us, then please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/This Is Horror. You'll get early bird access to each and every episode, and you can submit questions to the interviewee. You'll also automatically become a member of the This Is Horror Discord. And every year, there are bonus episodes for patrons only, such as Story Unboxed, the horror podcast on the craft of writing, in which Bob and I, and sometimes a special guest, will dissect a short story or film and let you know writing lessons and takeaways to improve your own writing. Another great way to support us is to leave us a review on the Apple Podcast app or website. And if you want to watch the video version of the This Is Horror podcast, join us on YouTube, youtube.com/@This Is Horror podcast. You can subscribe there and get notified every time there is a new video. And however you support us, I thank you in advance. Okay, before I wrap up, a quick advert break.
It was as if the video had unzipped my skin, slunk inside my tapered flesh, and become one with me.
From the creator of This Is Horror comes a new nightmare for the digital age, The Girl in the Video by Michael David Wilson. After a teacher receives a weirdly arousing video, his life descends into paranoia and obsession. More videos follow, each containing information no stranger could possibly know. But who's sending them, and what do they want? The answers may destroy everything and everyone he loves. The Girl in the Video is The Ring meets Fatal Attraction for the iPhone generation. Available now in paperback, ebook, and audio.
A brutal attack during a peaceful drive through the Irish countryside sets the stage for a grotesque tale of body horror, medical abuse, and occult conspiracy theory. Puppet's Banquet by Valkyrie LaCrue. Clay McLeod Chapman calls it a blissful injury upon the reader's psyche. Fans of Silent Hill, Hellraiser, and Cronenberg's The Brood will be consumed by its exquisite nightmares. Puppet's Banquet, out May 14th. Visit tenebraspress.com for more information.
Well, the day that this episode is airing is also the day that Daddy's Boy comes out. My new novel, my new dark comedy. So I would absolutely love it if you would buy a copy of Daddy's Boy. The first week is always very important in publishing. So do please buy the book. And leave a review on Amazon and Goodreads so you can help the algorithm get Daddy's Boy to the correct people. And let me say, whatever you think of Daddy's Boy, I really appreciate you checking it out. Don't be afraid to leave your honest opinion. 1 star, 2 stars, 3, 4, 5. It's all good. We can still be friends, and I hate that sometimes there is a reluctance for people to be honest, for fear of offending people or fear of authors getting upset. No, not at all with Daddy's Boy. I know it's going to be polarizing, so I want to know if you enjoyed it. So, Daddy's Boy, available now. Please help me out and check it out. It's in paperback, it's in ebook, and it's in audio. So, until next time, for a special Daddy's Boy launch episode where Jasper Bark, Dan Howarth and Bob Pastorella are interviewing me. Take care of yourselves. Be good to one another. Read horror. Keep on writing. And have a great, great day.
This is Horror Podcast.